The Green Bay Brown County Professional Football Stadium District heard an update from a top Packers official about the bid to bring the NFL draft to Titletown.
This coming after the Green Bay City Council gave its green light last week to potentially hosting the league event in either 2025 or 2027. Samantha Cavalli attended today's meeting this afternoon. She joins us now in the studio after learning just how focused the team is on the upcoming draft. Samantha.
Yeah, Bill and Cammie, by the end of the week, the Green Bay Packers and its partner Discover Green Bay will officially submit their bid to host the 2025 NFL Draft, and a decision could be made by the NFL in May. At today's meeting, Packers Director of Public Affairs Aaron Popke said the Packers remain optimistic about hosting the draft. The board today also filing and passing a motion to pledge 50% of the revenue the board gets when Lambeau Field hosts events outside of football season to put toward the Packers' proposal to secure the draft. Vice Chair of the Stadium Board, Keith Lucius, said the board felt this motion needed to be filed as the draft would be a huge economic benefit to Brown County.
I think it's important to strengthen the Packers' offer to increase the likelihood that Green Bay does get the NFL draft, because it's going to be such a huge boost for the economy in the local area.
Well, in other news, Popke says Lambeau Field will not be hosting an event this summer, saying they were unable to secure a date with soccer teams due to the construction of the stadium's upgraded video board, which won't be complete until late July, early August. And the original artist they wanted to bring in announced that they were not going on tour. Cammie?